Encompassed in my love of reviewing books is not only talking about the book itself, but about the how and the why of it all. I think broadly and generally, I find it fascinating to consider the way that we make media decisions and what influences and de-influences us in the course of deciding how we're going to spend our limited time and money. I think that part of it is especially interesting to me as somebody who is creating reviews and understands reviews as one of the tools that we use in order to make those decisions. I recently was watching a video that was kind of bemoaning the general state of reading and book communities and publishing. And they made a point about influencer culture and how there was a time that we would walk into bookstores sort of uninfluenced by anything. And I think it's really funny to consider that because social media and influencers and book communities that are online have certainly shaped that in a way that I think is different. I definitely remember more of a sense of going into a bookstore kind of disconnected and picking up things and reading back of the book blurbs, whereas now even doing that, I'm kind of doing it with Goodreads pulled up because I've come to lean on so many of these things to help me make good decisions about my limited time and money. But the idea that we were ever completely sort of divorced from influence is just certainly not true. I think it's a very human thing to consider that, we are immune to advertising or anything along those lines, but just walking into a bookstore is an exercise in being influenced about placement, about what publisher paid to be where, or what books in the season the publisher is putting their marketing dollars behind, or what relationship that bookstore has to which publisher. All of those things were already so much part of our experiences even before we had the means to connect with each other via social media. That was a long rambling introduction, and obviously I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this, but all of that is really just to say that I think a lot about how I enter into a book and what are the influences and biases that I'm bringing to the table. I think for me, in my entire history of reviewing, I've always really talked about a few things here for me as kind of being my ethos of what I'm reviewing. And one is that reviews are subjective. And I'm certainly not here to tell anybody what to do, what to buy, what to think. I'm bringing you my subjective opinion, but I'm going to do it decidedly. I'm not going to couch my opinion. It's my opinion. And I just kind of take it at face value that everybody knows that reviews are subjective and their opinions. But the other thing is that I always want to be as transparent with you all as possible. And I try to make sure that I'm informing you with what I brought into the book. What are my connections to it? What did I hear about it? What was I thinking before I went into it? Which I think is why I just really enjoy making these sort of 5-3-1 prediction videos. The last couple of times that I did this kind of video, I made my predictions first and then I went away and I read and I did a vlog style update. But I had the idea this weekend, oh, I want to make one of these videos and I have the perfect 3 books lined up to read. So I had this thought on Saturday after I picked up the first book on this list, and by Sunday night I'd finished all 3 books. And I was like, oh, I meant to start that video Monday. So we're getting this in one shot. And I'm not even sorry about it because who is she? She read 3 books in one weekend. So let's talk about it. My 5-star prediction was The Everlasting by Alix Harrow. This was such an interesting one to me because my internal bias was telling me one thing and my external influences were telling me another. I have read other books by Alix Harrow. I hated The 10,000 Doors of January. And the thing is that I say hated now. In retrospect, it has definitely soured in my memory. I think at the time I gave it 2 stars. And one of the things I talked about was being disappointed because I saw so much potential in the writing itself. The writing at a line level had so many moments where I was like, oh, this person has skill. But there were things about the plot overall and then also the way that racism was portrayed through this biracial character that just made that experience a very bad one. And I think over time, I've just kind of hung on to those bad elements and to having talked about this book a couple of times in the context of the representation and the way that sometimes you can depict something and not really contend with the messages that it holds through that depiction. And then I read A Spindle Splintered when I was doing a Hugo reading project, and that was fine. I think I gave it 3 stars, but because I had that very negative experience, a fine book, an aggressively fine experience, fed more my idea that this author was not for me. But the thing is that I have friends who loved this. Specifically, Rachel from Reads with Rachel loved this book. She loved this book so much. And not only did she love this book, but I recently have been absolutely obsessed with Sleep Token. I like fell down this rabbit hole. I know I am very late. And in fact, I was so late. I only picked up their music after they had just left Orlando for their tour stop, which is like devastating. It's gonna be a thing that haunts me for the rest of my life. And the funny thing is that I had seen Rachel like gushing about Sleep Token probably back in May when Even in Arcadia came out. And I tried their music, like influenced by her. I was like, oh, let me check it out. And I listened probably to just the first song in Even in Arcadia, which is so funny because now I love that song. And I was like immediately like, nah, not for me. And I moved on. But when they were in Orlando and on all of my like local feeds, I had people like posting clips of the show, and I was taken with the clips that I was seeing of the show. And I was like, you know what? Rachel loves this. The show looks really cool. Let me give it one more chance. But this time I went back and I listened to some of the EPs first, but I like sat down to listen to Sundowning, which is their first studio length album. And I probably listened to Sundowning. I don't even want to guess how many times in a row, but it was like a concerning amount of just like listening and re-listening to Sundowning and being like, oh. And then like having this feeling of like not wanting it to end and knowing that I only had the opportunity to listen to This Place Will Be Your Tomb and Take Me Back to Eden and Even in Arcadia for the first time, like only once. This was like my one opportunity to experience this for the first time. So I just kept listening to Sundowning, and then I went through a whole journey of listening to each of them and texting Rachel my reaction and falling down this rabbit hole of their lyrics and everything it means to me and represents to me. And this is still happening. I'm like listening to them nonstop. I'm in deep right now. And so there was like the added layer of like, Rachel loves this, but also Rachel has talked about like how much this kind of reminds her of Sleep Token's vibes. So it's that second layer of adding expectations here. And I truly, like, I don't know, in my heart and my soul, I wanted to love this. I really, really wanted to love this. It like worried me that I would read this and not love this. And Rachel was sending me messages like, it's okay if you don't like it. So like truly, truly, I went into this like predisposed to enjoy it. I was ready to love this. The Everlasting is an adult fantasy, the story of a knight whose legend and history is deeply tied to the history and sort of the identity of this empire. And in the story, we see a scholar who is sent back through time in order to record this history. My impressions as I first started reading this was one, that I did enjoy the writing. There were definitely like lines that I was highlighting immediately. It was competent writing. Like you could tell that thought and care was placed into the way that things were arranged and the word choice and just like the language of capturing certain moments and feelings, which is always like catnip for me. It's always going to win me over. So at that line level, I was like, ah, yes, this is like refreshingly well written. I will say though that it wasn't an immediate sort of like falling in love and hit for me. We are kind of going back and forth between the point of view of the scholar and excerpts of the story of Una, this knight. And I think that in the going back and forth, right, that's going to necessarily create a slower build. It's going to kind of slow down the momentum of your story. So even though it was easy to read, I did kind of feel like a little laggy in investing in this story. And so I was like worried. I was tense kind of reading this, like, yeah, the writing is good, but like I wasn't loving it. And then I hit the 30-ish% mark, which is like when one major portion of the story clicks into place in terms of what we are actually seeing here. What is the like mechanic of the story? And it was this moment where I immediately was like, oh no, like this whole thing has been slow building in a way that I wasn't even really realizing how much I was investing in terms of feelings for characters in the story, because that hit and immediately I felt my heart squeeze and I felt like the tension of the moment and the like rush of breath from the lungs of like, oh, this is what's happening. And so it was even more satisfying to me because of that, because it kind of snuck up on me how much I was invested in the story. I thought thought I was having a perfectly fine time, and then this clicked and I was like, oh no, like I am in this. And from that point on, I was unwell. I was simply unwell reading this. And here's the thing, is that it's not even like kind of a universal recommend to me. It's not one that I'm gonna sit here and say everybody needs to read this, because there are things here that are very particular and are like particular reasons why it hit for me. I think that this is a story that sort of like, not that it has no plot, it definitely has a backbone, but it sort of deprioritizes plot at moments in order to prioritize its characters. And this very circular star-crossed lovers thing that it is doing. And you know, feed it to me. I love it so much. I also think that the writing style and like the position of the book is kind of navel-gazy and not in an overindulgent way. I think the best thing that this book does is keeps it to a tight 300 pages, right? We're not talking about something that's bloated and lagging. It does still have that feeling of being slow, but not in pace, right? It is a tight 300 pages that builds carefully. That's what it is. It's like care in all of the pieces that it is laying out for you. So the writing is not overindulgent to me. It's not overly flowery, but it has a lot of yearning. It has a lot of angst. It is very atmospheric. And so I think that's another portion of this, that you kind of have to be a fan of being in that earnest angst in order to enjoy this, which again, feed it to me. I think that this did such an excellent job of building both our characters. I think I liked Una sort of immediately. Like, I don't know, give this like tortured big woman a big sword and I'm like, sure, I'm there, you sold me. Owen, I think, is a little more complicated. Nothing here is like incredibly deep or complex in terms of the themes that it is exploring, but it is, to use this word again, careful, and it has a very defined point of view, and it's almost better for the way that it like lays things out for you, the reader, so that each time you hit a development or a twist or another milestone in the character arc, it feels very satisfying because you see these seeds being laid. And for Owen, you kind of understand immediately like the contradictions of him. He is a man of color of the colonized people in this world, but his father is a soldier for the empire. And so he grows up in this empire completely cut off from the other side of his heritage. And so through him, we're getting a lot of questions about like the justifications that he has in terms of going then and serving the empire. What is he thinking in order to do what he is doing? And so you struggle a little more with him because of his decisions and what he's doing, but I found his arc satisfying as we watch him struggle with those things. I really loved everything that this had to say about nationalism and about empire and about violence in order to secure those things, and the way that it takes half steps even further into some of the things that it is exploring. So things like, okay, history is written by the victors. It takes that extra half step to say, okay, but what about the weapons that win the victory? What happens to them? What are they experiencing? And how does history treat them? Like, that's this story. Everything that it says about history and about sort of like sanitizing a narrative and about propaganda and how national identity is centered so much in a story, in a national story. I was thinking so much while reading this about like a lot of different media. It was making me think of other fairy tales and also very interestingly superhero media. And I was thinking a lot about the MCU, which is really funny, which a lady night in superheroes, you know, there is a tie here, but specifically because this talks a lot about the cost of one human life. And when we did our big project deep diving into the MCU for Snark Squad Pod, like an ongoing joke at the very beginning of that project was about collateral damage and how, you know, in these movies, things are blowing up and you see buildings fall and you don't very often focus in on like the cost of human life within explosions and buildings and things like that. And the ways that like it can sometimes focus on like people running, you know, or fleeing a scene, it can be very bloodless. It can be very divorced from this idea of what the actual collateral damage is and the costs. And the MCU got to the idea of like the like physical cost of buildings and cities faster than it got to the idea of like the human life cost. But there was a time there when it was also contending with this idea of, if you are a hero, if you're willing to sacrifice even one human life in order to support the greater good. And that is a big theme here. Like, is one life worth it? If there is some sort of greater good that you are serving, can you sort of like endlessly torture one person? Is that an acceptable cost? And then of course this goes into further questions about what is the greater good? Is this a greater good? Who gets to decide the greater good? And I loved all of those questions sort of like simmering in the background of what is ultimately this very tragic love story. Another thing that is like kind of in the equation of whether or not you will enjoy this is that it is time travel based. So whenever you have time travel, I think that there is kind of a hand waviness to it all. And because this leans more fantasy than I would say sci-fi, for a lot of this book, you just kind of have to go with some of it. But I will say that there are ways that things were explained at the end that I personally found, again, very satisfying. I'm not going to tell you that every aspect of like the magic is super explained or that it goes from soft to hard magic all of a sudden, but I do think that you could tell that the author understood what the reader questions would be and what the gaps were, and there were ways that we didn't fully understand and we were kind of going with it because there was more information to be had at the end. I love that feeling that the author understands and grasps the edges of their stories, and the way that we got those final answers at the end really felt like there was an understanding here of what those edges were. Truly, I had such a good experience with this. I was on the edge of my seat. I was so stressed out through the end of this because there is this feeling of dread that you're working towards about how this could possibly work out. But I found the end incredibly satisfying. I do think that it's like bittersweet. I loved all of the ways that the author kind of led me on this journey, and all of the ways that when there was like something to reveal, it felt both like jaw on the ground and of course it's that thing, that was like on the tip of my tongue always, that if I had thought about it like closer, I would have gotten there too. That is my favorite kind of feeling when you have any kind of, I don't even want to call them twists, because when you say twists, people expect a certain thing. I don't think that there's necessarily twists in this book. It's just like the plot progression that when you get to these moments, they're that, yeah. So I really loved being led by the author through that journey. I thought the writing was incredibly beautiful. These characters will live in my heart and my memory for a very long time. And I'm so glad that I picked this up, and I was predisposed to love it, but I really, really loved it. It's now been like a day or two and I've been sitting with it. And when I first finished reading, I had this feeling that like anybody rating this between 3 and 5 stars, I understand. I understand how you got to that rating. And personally, I was waffling between 4 and 5 stars. I think some of the ways that I felt that slowness in the beginning and the way that my own emotions were kind of throttling me towards the end, that I kept like having to stop and breathe and like walk away and come back, and we're influencing that back and forth between 4 and 5 stars. So whenever that happens to me, I just kind of split the difference and meet in the middle. So I finished and gave this a 4.5 stars. And I'm always a little gun shy about handing out my 5 stars anyway. Removed enough from this, having influenced other people in my Discord to read it and seeing their reactions and just really sitting with the strengths versus weaknesses, I do think that this is a 5-star read for me. It will be one of my favorite reads of the year. I'm so very happy that I picked it up. I'm so very happy that I liked it. And Rachel and I can continue to be friends. Next up was my 3-star prediction, and that is The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. I started reading Some Desperate Glory when I was doing a Hugo reading project. I think that was the first year that I failed at doing my Hugo reading project, and I haven't done since, just because I've been in the worst reading slump of my life for months and months and months now. So I started reading it, and I really was appreciating the beginning, but it was also incredibly stressful, which is part of the reason that I put it down. So I still have Some Desperate Glory on my TBR, and then I went and I bought The Incandescent as well. I bought this because I think on like Instagram or something, I was like, I'm at the bookstore, tell me what to buy. And I got The Incandescent a couple of times, and I was like, yeah, sure. My bias going into this, and the reason that this was a 3-star prediction for me, there were some mixed reactions to this in my Discord from readers. It's also one that when I talked about reading, I got a couple of like, I can't wait to hear what you think. In that way that tells me that people aren't sure. This is about a magical school and the magician who is essentially running the school, the warden of the school. In this world, there are demons that are attracted to magic. And so as a warden of the school, she also has to keep all of these students safe, especially because as they're learning magic, their magic can be a little uncontrolled and unpredictable. I had such an interesting experience with this one as well. I really loved the beginning of this book. I was immediately hooked, and I loved the main character. I loved Warden. I loved her narrative voice and her positionality as this magician who is very good at her job, very competent, but is also like running the day-to-day of the school. And we kind of feel the weight of those responsibilities and even like the dredge of her day-to-day life. I found that I appreciated like the way that this represented academia and came from that perspective versus a student's perspective. At the same time that we're learning more about this character, about why she's rather alone and kind of cut off from other people. I also really loved like the underlying conflict here of this rift and this large power she has to fight against that is somehow connected to her own sort of tragic backstory. All of that was great. The beginning of this was great. I think that there is a weird lag here in the middle. And the thing is that we get one portion of the story and you kind of think you're going in one direction, but that conflict is apparently wrapped up and we move on and we go back to sort of like the day-to-day life of the main character. And we are seeing like ripples of consequences or what could be consequences of that like beginning main thing. But it almost starts to feel like two different stories that were mashed together in one book. And the end does tie them together. You understand what is happening, why it is one cohesive story, but I don't think that this was put together well enough. I think it still feels too cleaved in two. I think that like the stop and go of it is a little too harsh. And so it makes it easy at that point to kind of put it down and not come back. Or if you do come back, kind of wander through the next portion going, okay, and because we built so high with that first portion of the story and we're just like, and then here we are again. And I think it does a disservice to the story overall. Like I was enjoying the beginning of this like a 4, maybe even a 5-star amount. And in that lag, it kind of settled into this 3-star amount, but I did very much enjoy the ending of this. I especially liked the ending sort of confrontation and the way that it was handled. I love some of the pieces that were brought together into that final conflict. I think some of them were also pretty telegraphed, and I can see that bothering readers. But here's the thing is that I also think that Tesh did a good job convincing me why it would have been obvious to me on the outside looking in and why it was a perfect trap for our main character. I understand why this character did not see it coming, or at least why she convinced herself that it was fine, that she was in control, that she knew what she was getting into, that nobody could get one over on her because she was very clear-eyed about the situation in a way that made sense for her characterization and spoke to her own sort of bravado and skill, but also her weaknesses in terms of processing her own emotions and understanding her own heart. There is a romance in here that I also think could bother people in terms of how developed or undeveloped it is. They know each other for a while, but they only spend a limited of time really interacting and getting to know each other. And then that character at that like halfway lag disappears. But she shows up at the end, and I think their interactions at the end might feel rushed to people. I do think we could have gotten more. I do think it could have been better developed, but it also kind of worked for me, again, for these two characters that we're told throughout this whole thing are very bad at this, are very bad at interacting. And we get a lot of development or understanding, at least, of the warden's feelings through her avoidance of the situation. It feels like we understand where her heart is because of her actions, even though her actions are taking her farther away from where her heart is. So when we finally get that moment of like, yes, I understand why it might seem sudden or shallow to other people, but to me it felt seated in the story. So I was like perfectly fine with it. I do think that it is valid for other readers to say it happened too quickly and should have been better developed. So overall, I think I enjoyed this more than it actually called for. Like I can see its problems and I was still vibing and having like a grand old time reading it. Probably my enjoyment was at a 4. If I like stand back and look at the mechanics of the story, 3 stars maybe. So we're splitting the difference and we're calling this a 3.5 stars. So I actually felt better than expected about this. Also, like, I would reread this. I would have a grand old time rereading this. And I bet actually on reread, I'd be like, yeah, that's great, 4 stars. And it took me a while to think about my 1-star read because I didn't want to go out of my way to purchase a book I thought I was going to not like when I already have so many books at home. So I was kind of thinking about what I had here. And wouldn't you know it, I had the perfect book for this entire situation, and that is Blood Moon by Britney S. Lewis. I talked to you guys a little bit about this book in my last video. I purchased it because I was at the grand opening of a romance bookstore and I wanted to support the bookstore, and this edition is beautiful. And I recognize Britney S. Lewis from social media. I didn't know a ton about this book or the plot specifically, but I had seen Britney talking about Black girls in paranormal romance and wanting to do this story that was, you know, Twilight and the Vampire Diaries and things like that, but had a Black main character. And so I wanted to support the author as well. And I was curious about what that would look like. Now, I was not hopeful. Like, you give me a Twilight comp and like my expectations are gonna go all the way to the floor. That was made even worse by the fact that I got home and I was like, yeah, I bought this book. Someone in my Discord who had already read it, Jess, was like, And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. So this is a story of a girl named Mirabella, whose father, the sheriff, or I don't know, like the police chief, Bobby, her mom goes missing and she doesn't know why. She hasn't heard from her mom in a long time. And then she gets suddenly accepted into a university she didn't apply for. So, but she's like, whatever, they're paying for my school. Sure. She assumes her dad applied for her. And so she goes to this college and people there are weird. I don't know what to tell you. There's one cute boy who's after her and another cute boy who warns her to stay away, to get out of his school. Plot where? Plot where? Plot how? Plot who? Plot nowhere. Plot never. At the beginning of this, I was like, whatever, I can read this quickly because there is a kind of generic, readable, tropey quality to the writing that makes this like so easy. It's like baby food. That's how it goes down. Like, there's absolutely no tension or friction here to stop you from turning pages. There's nary a hiccup, nary a thought you have to have, which makes something incredibly easy to read. So like, I blinked and I'd read the first 35 pages. And so I was like, okay, probably I can get through this. And that was the most complimentary thing that I had thought through 35 pages. And then the more that I read, the more I started to get kind of angry about this entire situation. I was angry because of how boring and bland this was managing to be. I even now, like, I finished this last night. This was the most recent thing that I read, and I'm still kind of like at a loss to describe what I think about this book, apart from my feelings of being very annoyed reading this. Because here's the thing, if you ask me to think about, like, is this the worst written thing that I've ever read before in my life? Like, probably not. It's very clunky, and the dialogue here is terrible. And the thing is about like the quality of the writing and the story and the dialogue is that all of it feels like what this is. It's almost like the author was telling us exactly what this was and we were not listening, because I thought we were joking about this being like badly written Twilight fan fiction, which is how she was promoting it in early days. Now she's kind of like changing her tune a little bit. I think especially as people are misusing words and talking about this in terms of plagiarism. But here's the thing though, is that it's difficult to read this and not feel like you are just lifting so many things from Twilight that it is it is uncomfortable, I guess, in a way. You're trying to pay homage, I guess, in some way, or you're trying to participate in these tropes or in this genre, but the author has walked the line so closely to what has come before that it starts to become indistinguishable. And it also becomes so bland because it is indistinguishable. There is like maybe one sort of interesting choice that this ever makes, but otherwise, like, you're just going beat for beat in a way that I think that the author thinks that this is kind of funny or doing something, and just made me angry, honestly. Like when the Jacob character shows up and goes, "Where the hell have you been?" I'm groaning out loud. I want to throw the book. I I don't think that's funny, because leading up to that point, right, we have Bobby the sheriff and Mirabella, the main character. We have the Edward character saving her, this time from falling off a cliff, but he appears at her side suddenly and they have the exact same conversation about how'd you get here? And he's like, I can't tell you, but ask questions and you'll figure it out. And she like puts the pieces together and thinks almost the exact same thoughts about like, I know what he is. Like, it's so similar that by the time we get to where the hell have you been, that line, I'm like, please stop. And it's extra disappointing because I think the project of putting women of color, putting people of color in like well-loved tropes, in well-loved genres, and reimagining it, or at least giving people of color the opportunity to do what others say is dead or what is passé. I love that shit. And I think the person doing that best right now is probably Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Sylvia Moreno Garcia is going to take a subgenre, a trope, a story that has been done before and infuse it with Mexican culture and Latina identity and just say, I'm doing it too. And I eat it up pretty much every time. I love the way that she approaches it. And it is not to say that you have to do it seriously, because I think Sylvia Moreno Garcia does think about what that means for intersections. Like, she is also talking about then racism and classism and colonialism. And like, sure, that's probably not the project of Blood Moon, the Twilight fan fiction. I'm not saying even that this has to take it super seriously, but I don't think that this thought about it at all. I don't think that this had any interest in doing anything except for exactly what was done before, but now with a Black girl. And you mostly hear that she's a Black girl when you occasionally get a description of her like wearing a bonnet. It felt so hollow. It felt so empty. It felt like a game of telephone of like all of these things that you had already read before. Like, makes me even more angry because I found the main character so hollow. And like, if you're going to create this Black main character and put her in your favorite tropes, like, make her a character, like, give her something to shine on, maybe give her a skill or the ability to rub even two brain cells together. But all of that was missing here. For most of this, she's just kept in the dark, which this is a withholding information kind of story. So she's just running around going, what's going on? And everybody's like, we can't tell you. And that's the majority of it. But she's also like not rubbing any brain cells together. She's not figuring anything out. She got here into the school. She doesn't even know why she's here. Her friends who have a hobby and she doesn't only ever really pop up to be like, so two guys like you, right? Like, it's all so empty that the fact that the author talked about this being like giving Bonnie from the Vampire Diaries like the story she should have had is incredibly insulting to me, to Bonnie, who still deserves better. I think that the amount of annoyance that I had at the end of this was probably outsized, when like the biggest sin that this commits is that it is incredibly dull and generic and bland and had absolutely no imagination and like went into a sandbox and like flung the sand around, right? Did the least interesting thing that you could do with the sand imaginable. And so, not to victim blame myself, but it kind of feels like I am to blame for the majority of my negative experience, simply because I kept reading this. And at the end, when the plot, I guess, finally shows up, I don't know if you could even call it that. It's just because this string of like almost like events where things go wrong for some reason and characters that you had met before are like, and I'm here in evil, truly nonsensical ways. That's, I guess, the plot that shows up at the end. And by that point, while all of this is happening, I'm just so mad that I have to finish so that I can tell you that my prediction was right and I gave this 1 star. Beautiful addition that went to supporting a local bookstore and a Black author. I will now be selling it on my Pango. I cannot explain to you how this was a 1-star prediction, and still I feel absolutely bamboozled by this book. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat in the comments. Or if you have books on your radar that you are predicting will be 5, 3, or 1 stars, tell me why down in the comments. Today's free way that you can support my channel and this content is going to be to go over to Goodreads and to mark Our Sister's Keeper by Jasmine Holmes as to read. I know that seems kind of silly, but marking a book to read on Goodreads shows interest and is one of the ways that not only do we track, but that we show bookstores and people in the industry that there is buzz around a book. I'm trying to get it to 1,000 ads before the end of the year. So if you can take 10 seconds, I will even include the link in the description. Just go over there. Even if you're not actively using Goodreads, if you have an account, I would appreciate if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed my channel, if you enjoyed this content. That's a very easy way to support me today. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.